A general walks into a diner. Minutes later, he's in cuffs for looking suspicious. Sounds unreal? It happened. And what came after? An anonymous live stream, a furious phone call from the Pentagon, and a town forever change will leave you speechless. It was just after dusk when Lieutenant General Elias Monroe, 51, turned off I-95 and into the town of Millstone, North Carolina. A blink and miss kind of stopped tucked between two rural counties in the deep southern dark. He meant to stop for just a few minutes. 6 hours behind the wheel, an empty stomach, and a screaming inbox full of Pentagon emails had his mind nearly overheating. Fort Liberty was still over an hour away. Tonight's strategy meeting would decide next year's Special Forces budget. But right now, what he needed wasn't planned. It was a hot burger and 5 quiet minutes. He pulled the rental sedan into a spot outside Maggie's Grill, a worn, retro-style diner with a lazily flickering neon sign, and the smell of frying oil drifting on the breeze. As Elias stepped out, his deep blue dress uniform was crisp, his chest heavy with medals, and 3 silver stars shimmered beneath the weak glow of a street lamp, a light just dim enough to resemble America's fading awareness of men like him. The bell above the diner door jingled as Elias entered. A few heads turned. 2 truckers, a small family, and a blonde waitress named April McKay. No one said anything, but their glances held a mix of surprise and admiration. He picked a window seat where he could keep an eye on the car. Back straight, he slowly peeled off his gloves, eyes scanning the cramped but cozy space. A faded country song trickled from the jukebox. The scent of grilled onions and burnt coffee hung in the air, almost comforting. April approached, notepad in hand, her smile genuine but cautious. "You stationed nearby?" "No," Elias replied, voice low and calm. "Just passing through. Got a meeting at Fort Liberty." She nodded, clearly impressed. "Burger and fries? It's the local classic." He smiled faintly. "Takes me back to Ramstein." As she walked away, Elias unlocked his phone. A message from Camille, his wife. "Don't forget to eat something warm. And tie that tie right this time, General." He chuckled softly. Even when he was negotiating with the Secretary of Defense, Camille remained the only person who dared call him General with that kind of teasing affection. He ate slowly, savoring each bite of cheesy, greasy perfection, his mind drifting over the notes he'd present later tonight. Outside the window, 2 men leaned against a faded white sheriff's car, one lighting a cigarette, the other nodding and pointing discreetly toward a sedan. Elias didn't notice. All he saw was a sleepy town, a warm diner, and a quiet night settling in. But not every storm starts with thunder. Outside Maggie's Grill, the street lamp flickered weakly, as if the town of Millstone was tired of itself. 2 police officers, Officer Brent Maddox, 44, and Officer Kyle Dempsey, 29, leaned against their patrol car parked diagonally across the street, crumpled paper coffee cups in hand, eyes locked on the ash-gray sedan belonging to Elias Monroe. "That car doesn't fit in around here," Maddox muttered, squinting beneath his cap. "Military plates. And the guy who stepped out looks like a damn war movie extra." Dempsey gave a dry chuckle, exhaling smoke into the air. "Neat. Clean. Metals gleaming. But that skin tone doesn't match the uniform." "Guess Halloween came early," Maddox smirked, voice dripping with contempt. "They didn't call dispatch to run the plates. Didn't verify identity. Didn't ask anyone inside. They just stood there, judging a man by his appearance and the color of his skin. Things the law and decency should have moved past long ago." Inside, Elias pulled out his wallet, placing a 20 on a check that totaled less than 11. "Keep the change," he said, looking at April. "It's a cold night." She smiled. "Thank you, sir. Stay safe out there." He nodded, adjusted his collar and tie, and stepped out into the night, leaving the soft jingle of the diner door behind him. The wind cut through his uniform. Elias walked slowly toward his car, reaching into his pocket for the keys. The street lamp's glow reflected off the metals on his chest, casting a soft, dignified shimmer, the kind of light that was supposed to symbolize respect. but not to Maddox. "Hey, stop right there." Maddox's voice ripped through the night. Elias turned, his hand frozen midair. His eyes weren't panicked. They were alert, focused. The gaze of a man who'd faced real weapons, not just flashlights. "Evening, officers," Elias said, calm and composed. "Something wrong." "That uniform." Maddox stepped forward, flashlight aimed square at his chest, lighting up every stitch, every decoration. "Where'd you get it?" "Huh?" Elias tensed his jaw slightly, but kept his voice even. "I'm Lieutenant General Elias Monroe, United States Army. I'm en route to Fort Liberty. I have full documentation, if you need to verify." "Oh, a lieutenant general, huh?" Dempsey chuckled behind him, circling to the left, eyes scanning Elias from head to toe like a man casing a fake. "Sounds real impressive. You got ID for that bedtime story?" Elias nodded, slowly. "In my wallet, left pocket. I'll reach for it, slowly." Maddox placed his hand on his belt, close to the Glock 19, holstered at his hip. "Nice and easy, General. I'd rather not have a reason to call an ambulance." Elias pulled the wallet out with 2 fingers, extending it forward. Dempsey snatched it, flipping it open. Inside, a gleaming military ID. Photo, service number, official signature. "Real or not, we'll see," Maddox sneered. "But let me make one thing clear. You don't look like any general I've ever seen." Elias didn't blink. "And I suppose all the generals you've met look like something out of a recruiting poster. White, blue-eyed, silver-haired." The air froze, as if even the wind paused to listen. It was silence, but heavy, the kind of silence where truth doesn't need to shout, because it lands like stone. The ID was still in Kyle Dempsey's hand, its laminate reflecting the flashlight beam like it wanted to scream. Legitimate, official. But in his eyes, there was only one thing he saw. A black man in a uniform he refused to believe. Brent Maddox stepped closer, his breath thick with burnt coffee and cigarette smoke, hitting Elias square in the face. He didn't look at the ID, didn't call it in, didn't check a name. He stared straight at Elias's chest, at the 3 silver stars, the combat ribbons, the Joint Chief's insignia. But to Maddox, it was all just costume jewelry in some cheap street performance. "Listen up," Maddox growled. "Those badges are real pretty. But what I see is a poser, hustling a costume for discounts and a few yes sirs." Elias didn't move, but the disappointment on his face ran deep. Still, he had been forged in combat, not to rage, but to control. His anger, his surroundings, himself. "I'm not here asking for special treatment," Elias replied, his voice low and cold. "All I'm asking is respect for truth. And if you're still unsure, call Fort Liberty. Ask for Colonel Nadine Brooks. She can verify everything right now." "Oh, we're calling in friends now." Dempsey mocked, narrowing his eyes, like Elias had just recited a bedtime fantasy. "We're not playing phone a friend. We ask. You answer. Now hands on the car." "There's no legal basis for that request," Elias said firmly. "I've committed no offense. What you're asking is unlawful." "Unlawful?" Maddox barked a laugh, but there was nothing joyful in it. It was a laugh of a man who had power, and was getting high off abusing it. "You think you're in the Pentagon now," he snarled, then suddenly lunged, grabbing Elias's arm, and yanking it behind his back with unnecessary force. Elias let out a quiet gasp, not from pain, but from the shock of realizing that he, a lieutenant general in the United States Army, was being treated like some low-rent impersonator on the very soil he had once bled to protect. Dempsey rushed in, snapping the cuffs tight. Elias's wrists went pale under the strain. His head was shoved down against the sedan's hood, cold, rough metal pressing into his skin, like the very weight of contempt itself. "You're under arrest for impersonating a military officer and resisting lawful orders," Dempsey said, his voice gleeful, like he'd just hit the lottery. A couple exited the diner, eyes wide in disbelief. The woman pulled out her phone, and started recording. The flash popped, capturing the image of a United States general in handcuffs because he stood in the wrong skin. From the diner doorway, April McKay burst out. "Brent, Kyle, what the hell are you doing?" "Step back, April," Maddox barked, "or you're next." But she didn't step back. Her blue eyes locked onto Elias, his body now pinned against the hood of a patrol car. The cold wind swept through the lot, but he didn't shiver. He glanced toward her, no plea in his eyes, only a single, clear message. "Call Fort Liberty. Ask for Colonel Brooks. Call. Now." April understood. No more words needed. She gave a slow nod, a silent promise. "I'll do the right thing." Elias didn't resist, but as they pushed him toward the cruiser, he said, "Right pocket. My phone. Call the contact labeled Pentagon. Make the call if you want to keep your jobs tomorrow." They didn't call. They just laughed, shoved him into the car, and slammed the door behind him, leaving Millstone's night disturbingly quiet. The Millstone police station sat between two unlit roads, looking more like an abandoned storage shed with a badge bolted on. Inside, a flickering fluorescent light spilled pale blue over everything, casting a cold, lifeless glow. Lieutenant General Elias Monroe sat in Interrogation Room 3. His wrists were still cuffed, chained to a rusted iron loop bolted beneath a dented steel table. His once immaculate dress uniform now wrinkled, the stains from the squad cars had still smearing one sleeve. In front of him sat Officer Maddox, slouched in a chair, feet propped up, flipping through Elias's wallet like it was a toy. Dempsey stood by the door, phone in hand, smirking like he was texting someone the punchline to a bad joke. Both men wore the same look of smug satisfaction, as if they'd just caught themselves a high-end con artist. "This wallet looks pretty damn real," Maddox said, trying and failing to sound professional. "But scammers these days, they fake everything. Badges, ID cards, right, Kyle?" "Facts," Dempsey snorted. "I saw a video once. Dude wore a uniform to karaoke night. Fooled the mayor." Elias said nothing. He glanced at the wall clock. The hour hand ticked past 11:39 p.m. Every second felt like a round chambered into a weapon. But he wasn't afraid. He was waiting for the moment when truth would be forced to speak. Then he broke the silence. "You were warned," Elias said, his voice low and deliberate. "I didn't resist. I presented ID. I asked you to verify. You chose not to." Maddox crossed his arms. "We followed our gut, and my gut says, you're full of it." Elias lifted his head, eyes sharp as a blade, then let the truth speak for itself. He leaned forward, the cuffs clinking against the table. "Right pocket. My phone. Call the contact labeled Pentagon DS Vaughn. You have 5 minutes before the situation spirals out of your control." Dempsey stepped forward, rummaging through Elias's pocket. The iPhone slid out. He smirked at first, until the screen lit up and unlocked with Face ID in an instant. His face fell. The contact list popped up, and just as Elias said, Pentagon DS Vaughn sat at the top. "What's DS?" Dempsey frowned. Maddox stopped smiling. "Deputy Secretary," he muttered. "That's the freaking Deputy Secretary of Defense." Dempsey swallowed hard. Just as he hovered over the contact to make the call, a voice cut through the static hum of the ancient hallway air conditioner. "You're being watched. You're live. Over 20,000 people are watching right now." Maddox froze, his brow furrowed. He turned toward the narrow frosted glass window above the interrogation room door. Outside, in the hallway, a teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17, stood close to the door, her phone held high, the LED light casting a harsh glow across her flushed but unshaken face. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Her voice was harder than any command they'd ever received. "My father served at Fort Liberty. He taught me one thing. When you see injustice, you act." Dempsey stammered. "What the hell? How did you get in here?" A voice from the front desk called out, "She's John's daughter, the night shift guard. She was waiting in the lobby. Someone must have left the door open." Maddox snarled. "Turn that phone off. Get out of here." But the girl didn't move. Today, the man in cuffs is a general. Tomorrow, it could be my dad. Or me. And you're not going to delete this. And right then, the phone rang. Dempsey answered, because no one dared to ignore it now. A woman's voice cut through like a scalpel. "This is Deputy Secretary Renee Vaughn, who is holding Lieutenant General Monroe. And do you have any idea what the hell you're doing?" Silence. Maddox was drenched in sweat. Dempsey froze mid-breath. Elias leaned forward, his eyes steady as steel. "Hello, Secretary Vaughn. I'm being unlawfully detained. At Millstone PD. No procedure. No cause. And I need you to take action. Immediately." Deputy Secretary Vaughn's voice hardened. Thunder in her throat. "Give me the name of the police chief. Right now. And uncuff him before I have someone knocking on your door." Interrogation room 3 suddenly felt heavy, like the air itself had turned to hot lead. The flickering fluorescent light still buzzed overhead, but now it was Renee Vaughn's icy, absolute authority. That commanded the room. "I'll ask one more time. Who is holding Lieutenant General Elias Monroe?" Chief Raymond Stokes pulled him through back after a frantic call from the front desk. Hadn't even caught his breath before snatching up the phone. Ma'am, Deputy Secretary Vaughn, this is Raymond Stokes, Chief of Police at Millstone PD. It appears there may have been a serious misunderstanding." "This isn't a misunderstanding, Chief." Vaughn's voice cut in, sharp as steel. "This is a flagrant violation of individual rights and an insult to the integrity of the United States Armed Forces. Your officers detained a sitting lieutenant general, without cause, without paperwork, without even a basic verification call." Stokes glanced around, saw Maddox pale as ash, Dempsey swallowing hard, and the teenage girl still live streaming from the hallway, her phone raised, her camera rolling. He knew in an instant there was no covering this up. We're in the process of releasing him now." "Not in the process," Vaughn snapped. "Immediately, if General Monroe is not released and publicly apologized within the next 3 minutes, I will personally call the Pentagon Inspector General and dispatch military police from Fort Liberty to shut down your entire facility." Elias still sat upright, wrist chained, but posture perfect, like he was commanding a battalion, not waiting for justice. His gaze wasn't angry anymore. It was unnervingly calm, as if he'd known the outcome the moment they shoved him into the squad car. Chief Stokes trembled slightly, motioning for Dempsey to unlock the cuffs. Dempsey fumbled the keys, dropping them with a metallic clang that made everyone flinch. Maddox sat frozen, unable to meet Elias's eyes. We're sorry, General," Stokes muttered, head bowed. "We were wrong." Elias stood slowly, the cuffs leaving red marks on his wrists. He didn't answer the apology. He simply turned his gaze to each of them. Maddox, Dempsey, Stokes, as if memorizing every face that had chosen not to see the truth. Just then, April McKay entered, still in her waitress uniform, clutching her order pad. She didn't speak at first, just looked at Elias with tear-rimmed eyes, before turning to Chief Stokes. "He told me to call the military. I did, and if I hadn't stepped up, maybe he'd already be face down in a ditch by now." Elias nodded to her, a small gesture, but it carried the weight of Battlefield 1. Without firing a single shot, the live stream was still running. Within 30 minutes, the clip of Vaughn's warning, Maddox's silent collapse, and Stokes's bowed apology had exploded across social media. The hashtag was everywhere. Hashtag General Monroe. Millstone was no longer a forgotten speck on the map. It had just been etched into history by the silence of those who abused power and the voice of a man who refused to bow. When the final handcuff clicked open, the sound rang out like a blade slicing through the thin veil of authority that Millstone PD had clung to all night. Lieutenant General Elias Monroe rose slowly, red marks from the steel cuffs burning on his wrists. He rolled his shoulders, adjusted his tie, and smoothed the fabric over his chest. where 3 silver stars still shimmered defiantly. Chief Raymond Stokes stepped back half a pace, his hands visibly trembling. Officer Dempsey stared at the floor, fingers clenched into knots. And Brett Maddox, once the loudest of them all, now leaned against the wall, eyes hollow, like he'd just come face to face with a ghost. In that silence, Elias stepped around the table and stopped in front of Maddox. No anger, no shouting. He simply looked him in the eye with the gaze of a man who had commanded soldiers in some of the world's harshest war zones and had never encountered cowardice like this. Then he spoke, his voice low and sharp, like steel drawn across a whetstone. A mistake is forgetting someone's name. But you didn't forget. You chose not to see. Not the ID. Not the rank. Not the man. The room was silent. Elias turned for the door. But then, as if remembering something, he looked back, his eyes scanning each face in the room. The issue isn't whether or not I'm a general. The issue is you saw a black man in uniform. And instead of respect, you saw suspicion. Instead of verification, you saw a chance to exert control. You don't need more training. You need to relearn what it means to be human. April stood quietly in the corner, her hands clenched around her order pad. As Elias passed her, she whispered, "Thank you for not staying silent." He nodded, "Thank you for not turning away." As Elias walked down the hallway, he didn't forget to nod toward the 16-year-old girl still live streaming. "Thank you for standing up for the truth." She beamed, nodding back, thrilled to have played her part in exposing the truth. The live stream kept rolling, and thousands were watching every second. As Elias walked out of the precinct, with no escort, no applause, no banners, he walked like the ground itself was waiting for his step, to remember how to be solid again. Outside, the patrol car lights still flashed through the night, but this time, they no longer represented authority. They were simply beacons, illuminating what could no longer be hidden. As Elias reached the final step, his phone buzzed. A message from Camille. "Are you okay? The news is blowing up online." He looked at the screen and typed just one line, "Still standing." And this time they saw, behind him, those who had once laughed at him were now fading into shadow. Ahead, the night was dissolving, making way for a dawn that could not be faked. The sun hadn't yet fully risen, but Millstone was no longer asleep. By the time Lieutenant General Elias Monroe walked out of the police station at 4 a.m., the live stream had passed 1 million views. By midday, it was the top story on X, Instagram, and national TV. "General handcuffed for wearing the right uniform in the wrong skin," blared CNN's headline. Fox News tried another angle. "Police fooled by man who looked too real." But no matter the spin, America was now saying one name, Elias Monroe, back at Maggie's Grill, where it all began. Media vans filled the parking lot. Locals gathered. Cameras rolled. April McKay, the only server on duty that night, stood behind the counter, hair tied up, lips pressed into a tight line. In front of her, 5 microphones, 3 cameras, and at least 2 news stations live streaming. "Can you tell us what happened last night?" a reporter asked. April nodded, took a deep breath. He walked in, looked like the whole world had weighed on his shoulders, and he still stood straight. No ego, no attitude, just ordered his food, sat quietly, paid double the bill. She paused, her eyes sharpening. But when he walked out, he wasn't seen as a general. He was seen as a suspect, a shadow, a threat. Her voice caught just once. And when they slammed him on the hood of that car, I knew this wasn't just about him anymore. Right then, Brent Maddox appeared behind the diner, cap pulled low, face pale, trying to dodge the cameras. A local spotted him, pointed and shouted, "That's him. That's the one who cuffed the general." The crowd surged. Reporters ran. April stepped out, not to shield him, but to look him in the eye one last time. And she said something no one would forget. "If you'd learned to listen instead of judge, maybe you wouldn't have mistaken a general for a criminal." Maddox didn't respond. He backed into his rusty pickup truck, slammed the door, and peeled away, fleeing the wrath of a town finally wide awake. That evening, Elias received a text from April. Told you, the whole country sees you now, in every sense of the word. Not long after, Elias turned on the TV. A talk show was airing a segment, replaying the footage of him being handcuffed, intercut with photographs of him in full uniform in front of the Pentagon. The host's voice came through clearly. This isn't just a story about a general being disrespected. It's a reminder that honor isn't defined by skin color. It's defined by how you live and how you stand up for yourself and for those who come after you. Elias sat quietly, eyes fixed on a hotel window. Outside, America was buzzing, but it was also beginning to awaken. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to anymore. 2 days after the incident, Millstone Police Department had become a household name, not for its scenery or community charm, but for being the place that detained a United States Lieutenant General, without checking his ID, without reason, and without even the faintest sense of wrongdoing. At Millstone PD headquarters, Brett Maddox and Kyle Dempsey sat in silence in a high-level emergency meeting. They were no longer in uniform. No badges, no sidearms, no radios. No one in the room spoke. No one needed to. Seated across from them were two individuals, an internal affairs supervisor from the Department of Justice Inspector General's office, and a senior representative from the U.S. Department of Defense. On the table lay a thick case file stamped clearly in bold. Disciplinary action and criminal review requests classified. The DOJ representative, a calm, composed woman in a dark suit, pointed her pen to 2 lines on the front page. Officer Brent Maddox. Immediate suspension without pay. Case referred to federal justice for potential criminal charges of unlawful detainment and abuse of authority against a senior military officer. Officer Kyle Dempsey. Immediate suspension. Accused of complicity, failure to verify identity, and obstruction of military verification protocol. Both men turned ghost pale. Dempsey opened his mouth to speak, but his attorney gently touched his shoulder and whispered, "Don't. Silence is your last shot at leniency." Maddox clenched his jaw, his face flushed with shame, but there was nothing left to defend. No one believed in his 20 years of experience anymore, not when he used it to assault the truth. The DOD investigator stood, his voice cold as a battlefield debrief. "You didn't just break protocol. You damaged the credibility of the entire law enforcement system at a time when this nation needs trust more than ever." She closed the file. "No privilege will protect you from accountability. Not today. Not ever again." At Millstone Town Hall, an emergency session was convened, for the first time including representatives from the Department of Justice, the Pentagon, and the American Civil Rights Defense Association. The goal was no longer to assign blame, but to rebuild a system rotted from its roots. The first to speak was Mayor Alice Renner, her face drawn tight. "We cannot fix a town if we don't have the courage to name its failures." Millstone failed, but starting today, that failure will mark the beginning of real reform. Next was April McKay, not an official delegate, but a voice that carried enormous weight after her live stream exposed the truth. "I'm not a politician," she said, eyes scanning the full chamber. "I'm just a waitress. But I know this. If a man in uniform, with 3 stars on his chest, can still be treated as a threat, then none of us are safe." In Washington, D.C., Deputy Secretary Renee Vaughn addressed the press herself. "We are now working with the Pentagon and the Department of Justice to launch a full-scale investigation into racially biased treatment of military personnel nationwide, from Millstone to every military base and police station we can reach." A reporter asked, "Madam Secretary, is this retaliation for what happened to Lieutenant General Monroe?" She smiled faintly. "No, this isn't retaliation. This is a wake-up call. And this time, we're not hitting the snooze button." Back in a Raleigh hotel room, Elias Monroe watched the press conference in silence. He didn't smile. He simply turned off the TV, pulled out an old military issue notebook, and wrote a single line, Change doesn't come from victory. It comes from the wounds that won't let us stay still. 3 days later, Fort Liberty welcomed Lieutenant General Elias Monroe, not as a returning officer from some foreign battlefield, but from the most defining campaign of his career, the front lines on his own homeland. There were no drums, no red carpet, but no one looked at him the same anymore. Young soldiers, especially those who were Black, Latino, Asian, whispered as he passed down the corridor, "That's him. He didn't back down. He's why I believe I can go further." During the strategic meeting, no one mentioned Millstone, but the atmosphere was different. Every glance seemed to say the same thing. "We saw, and we respect you." After the meeting, a young lieutenant named Malik Henderson, a newly commissioned Black officer, waited for Elias in the hallway. His face was tense, but his eyes burned bright. "General Monroe, how do you keep walking? After being treated like that?" he asked, voice trembling. Elias paused, looked him square in the eye, as if seeing himself at 25. "Son," he said, "they can rip a patch off your chest, but they can't take the worth out of your spine. You don't keep walking for yourself. You keep walking, so the next one knows where to step." Malik nodded, eyes shining. Elias gently patted his shoulder. The story of Millstone was no longer Elias's alone. It had become a reckoning, a mirror held up to a nation, not because he was a general, but because he had chosen when to stay silent and when to speak. And somewhere, in every barracks, in every boot camp, in every whispered mentorship between generations of service members, the name Elias Monroe had begun to live another life, not just as a man, but as a symbol. 2 months after the incident, Millstone was no longer the same town. The police department had undergone a full leadership overhaul. A new chief, Dana Holloway, a no-nonsense officer from Philadelphia with a record of fighting abuse of power, took over command. Mandatory racial bias training was implemented. Independent community oversight boards were formed. And for the first time in Millstone's history, the people were being seen and heard. April McKay, once just a quiet coffee pourer, was now a permanent member of the town council. During one meeting, she stood up and said, "I used to think staying silent kept me out of trouble, but silence is why everything kept going wrong." In Washington, D.C., Deputy Secretary Renee Vaughn submitted a joint proposal with the Department of Defense, a framework to protect civil rights for active duty service members. At a congressional hearing, she declared, no soldier should become a target just for wearing the wrong skin in the right uniform. And Lieutenant General Elias Monroe, he declined TV interviews, didn't write a book, didn't start a social media account. He returned to Fort Liberty, continued training officers, and every evening, he still walked the perimeter of the base, silent but present. One day, a young female cadet approached, anxiety in her eyes. "Sir, if the day comes when I get stopped like you did, what should I do?" Elias looked at her for a long moment, then gave a faint smile. Not bitter, not angry, just a man who had walked through fire and kept his character intact. "Remember, you have the right to stand tall. You have the right to speak truth. And you have the right to walk like the ground belongs to you. Because if we don't walk like that, who's going to walk first?" The end, but also the beginning. One town, one mistake, one man who didn't bow, and a country that could no longer look away.